New update on the pilot who took the mushrooms and tried to kill 83 people, and the mistake that's not being talked about on this episode of Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken, and you might recall that we covered the story last October of the Alaska Airlines pilot who was jumpseating when he tried to shut off the engines at 31,000 feet. He was stopped by the heroic and fast-acting flight crew, and the plane diverted, and the man, Joseph Emerson, was arrested. There were lots of mistakes in this story, but as I've researched it, I'm surprised at the lack of talk around what I think is one of the bigger mistakes that they don't talk about. We'll get to that, but here's the update just so you can kind of have a background. Information gleaned from an interview with ABC that Emerson and his wife have done, as well as some research that I've done. Everything that I found, people that know Joe Emerson all speak very highly of the man, and that it's an incredible, sad story of what's happened to him. So let's break it down. The flight was on October 22nd, 2023, a Sunday, and Horizon is a regional for Alaska Airlines, and the plane was an Embraer E-175 Flight 2059. It's the kind of plane that my co-host Christy flies and loves. It's a regional jet with 2 engines on the wings, and on board were 84 people, including Joe Emerson, and 80 passengers and 4 crew. The flight was from Everett, Washington to San Francisco. On most airline airplanes, there will be what's called a jump seat on the flight deck in the cockpit. Airlines will often give permission for a pilot who is trying to commute for work, get to another city where he or she might need to fly, to take the jump seat on the flight deck. Procedures for who gets to sit there varies for each airline, but generally, the captain will be the one who decides. Documents will have to be verified, and the jump seater will be briefed by that flight crew. On that Horizon flight, Emerson presented his credentials, needing to get to San Francisco for Alaska Airlines. And here's what Christy says. The cockpit jump seat on any commercial airliner is used for one of a few reasons. Sometimes it's for line checks, where an airline or an FAA representative observes the flying of a member of the crew as part of a normal semi-annual proficiency check. And when the jump seat is open and the weight and balance can support it, crews will allow an off-duty pilot to sit there to commute if the cabin is full and back. In order to be eligible to do that, the pilot must be current and in good standing with an airline. On the flight deck, there's not a lot of room. It's a regional jet, remember? Up above the pilots in the center of the overhead console are 2 red handles for emergency engine fire suppression. Pulling them would shut off the fuel to the engines, and depending on the model of the E-175, you may or may not be able to get the engines restarted. And let's set the stage for Emerson. 2 days prior, October 20th, Emerson and some friends had gathered to celebrate and remember a fellow pilot friend who had died 6 years earlier while on a run. Emerson claims that he had been struggling with the loss of his friend, so the group took psychedelic mushrooms. And that's Friday night. Sunday, he's boarded a Horizon flight. And here's what he had to say about the flight and the things that happened. Quote, "There was a feeling of being trapped," he recalls, and that feeling increased as the flight progressed. As an airline pilot, he was given the jump seat on the flight deck right behind the 2 pilots, and the plane reached cruising altitude of 31,000 feet. Emerson says the feeling increased until he believed, this isn't real, I'm not actually going home. Emerson says he reached out via text to a friend who texted him to just do breathing exercises, and he says that in that moment the phone read the text in his ear. That was what pushed him over the edge. He flung off his headsets, and the 2 pilots in front of him didn't react, which further convinced him that none of this was real. He says, that's when I was like, this isn't real, I need to wake up. In the next 30 seconds of his life, he says he wishes he could change. There are 2 red handles in front of my face, thinking this is my way to get out of this non-real reality. I reached up and I grabbed them and I pulled the levers. And as soon as Emerson grabbed the handles, the pilots pulled his hands away. The pilots unlocked and opened the cabin door for him, and he sat down in the flight attendant's jump seat outside the cabin after they relocked the door. There are different level alerts that a flight crew can communicate to ATC, and a quick Google gives you these 4. Number 1 is disruptive. 2 is physically abusive behavior. 3 is life-threatening behavior, and 4 is attempted or actual breach of the flight crew compartment. Here's the ATC audio from VAS Aviation of the pilots after they had moved Emerson outside the door.
President 2059, what is the threat level?
The threat is now in the back of the airplane, so we're reduced on the threat level. We're going to check in with the flight attendant to make sure everything is running smoothly, but it seems like he settled down as soon as he, after one moment of going a little bit overboard, we put him back. So,
President 2059, Roger, just so we can report this, what was the highest level that occurred?
It escalated to a 4 for 209, but he's out of the cockpit now.
Emerson sent a text to his wife right after being removed from the flight deck. It was simple. I made a big mistake. Yes, he did, and that's not in dispute. But I think he and his team omitted an important mistake, which I'll get to shortly. He ended up grabbing the main door lever, and the flight attendant stopped him. And then he told the flight attendant that she should handcuff him, which she immediately did. The flight landed in Portland, and Emerson was taken into custody. He spent the next 45 days in jail before being granted a bond. He believes he suffered HPPD, that's hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, which is a condition for usually first-timers where the visual hallucinations last for several days. Emerson in the ABC interview also admits to being an alcoholic, but that alcohol was not involved on the October 22nd event. Emerson and his wife Sarah are using the event to point a light onto the mental health issues for pilots. And while I do think there's a real and serious issue with pilot mental health, which we'll get to here in a moment as well, is Emerson linking the choice to take hallucinogenic drugs to mental illness? Maybe it's self-medicating of the mental illness. Now, we don't know the details, only what the Emerson team is putting out in the media, and maybe he suffers real mental issues, but clearly this pivot from a bad choice of taking a substance to mental issues has placed more sympathy on Emerson. The 83 counts of attempted murder have been downgraded to 83 counts of misdemeanor, reckless endangerment, and 1 felony count, first-degree endangering an aircraft. Which does bring us to the issue of mental illness in airline pilots. I personally know airline pilots that go through stuff where seeking help would be beneficial, but refuse treatment or just to go to treatment because it might cost them their livelihood. And recently there have been some movement in the FAA in which they've approved several antidepressants. Dr. Brent Blue, an FAA senior aviation medical examiner, has said, "Who would you rather fly with, a pilot who is depressed or a pilot who is depressed on medication?" Emerson and his wife have now created an organization to bring awareness to pilot mental health, which is great. I'm glad to see them make something positive from this event. And some of you might think that the pivot to mental health issue is a ploy to escape or lessen the consequences from his actions. I just don't know. Was it a bunch of friends partying and taking hallucinogens, or was it mental illness? Feel free to leave a comment below. To me, the mistake Emerson hasn't owned, well, that I don't see much conversation about, grabbing the red handles, that was a mistake. Putting 83 other lives in jeopardy, big mistake. FAA creating an environment of basically lie to fly, that's a mistake. But the real mistake not talked about was saying yes to the hallucinogenic drugs, saying yes to self-medication, saying no to getting help. And maybe I missed it in my research, so correct me in the comments if I missed it, but I never heard Emerson, it was a mistake to take the mushrooms. Was it the mushrooms' fault? No. Joe made a choice. Was it the mental illness's fault? No, Joe made a choice unless mental illness causes you to be unable to make choices. To me, that's the mistake not being discussed. And while the issue of mental health among pilots is an extremely important discussion, I hope this mistake of choice isn't being buried. In the ABC News report, the FAA told them, quote, "The FAA encourages pilots to seek help if they have a mental health condition, since most, if treated, do not disqualify someone from flying." Hopefully that's accurate. I do read that the FAA is giving more latitude to the aviation doctors, the AMEs. And if you are having mental health issues, I do encourage you, get help. As for Joe Emerson's future, While he has pleaded not guilty, it's very possible a plea deal will be made before a fall trial begins. Emerson has stated he takes full responsibility, and that's a good thing. He has admitted that he would like to fly again, but understands that may not be a possibility. My takeaway? Sure, just say no to drugs, but also say yes to help. I'm glad at the end of the day that the disaster did not happen on that flight, and hopefully Emerson and his family can find healing. And with all the jokes about mushrooms and pilots floating around the internet because of this event, I hope it doesn't cause you to forget the incredible danger 83 other people were in that night. Thanks for watching. Please support us by supporting our sponsors like FlyingEyesOptics.com, where using our code, taking off all caps one word, will get you 10% off. I mean, these things are great under helmets, headsets. Links for them and our other sponsors in the description below. And if you haven't seen our report from last year on the breaking news of this event, you can click right here. Take care. Remember, superior judgment trumps superior skills.